Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Guide to Command Lines, video number 2 in my series that's going to be about command line interfaces. First and foremost, you might notice that video number 1 is not on YouTube yet, and that's because, as I might have explained in my last video, that I had problems with my editor. So since I had problems with my previous editor, I have now been unable to take all of those recordings that I took before and edit them using a different one. Like the files are corrupted or something. I don't really know how to fix it. So I'm probably just going to have to re-record the whole thing. But basically, I apologize and I'll get it up there as soon as I can. But it's a very good basis layer beginning stuff to view before you view this video, but it's not required. This actually is a pretty concise video on its own. So let's get started. Also, yay, I learned how to do this quickly. Isn't that awesome? Okay, guide to command lines. What is a command line interface? Alright, first and foremost, what is an interface? Me right now, over here, I am the user interface. An interface is a unit. It is a thing that is doing a thing. It is a unit that is doing something. I'm a person, and I am doing something with the computer, therefore I am the user interface. Now, the computer itself is known as the computer interface. And this guy right here, the means by which I am doing everything that I am showing you right now, the thing that has a mouse and also gives me pretty pictures on the screen, that's a GUI, which is also known as a graphical user interface. And all of these have to work together. And at the end of the day, the CLI, the command line interface, is the one that works as an interpreter going from the user to the computer. So, let me show you. This is the command prompt, also known as cmd.exe. It is my command line interface for Windows 2000. It is for Windows 8.1. This is my means of communicating with the computer directly. This is the program that interprets the words that I am typing on this screen into commands that the computer then outputs those commands to me. Alright? So, CLI acts as an interpreter. Quick history on the CLI. The very first ones were teleprinters. This is a nice little teleprinter over here. Another word for teleprinter is actually a teletypewriter, which shorthand for teletypewriter is TTY, which if you're familiar with Unix or Linux systems at all, then TTY is actually usually a shorthand for the text interface that you have. And this is why. The teleprinter, once upon a time, was the means by which you type it and it sent what you typed over the wire. Okay? Teleprinters are the technology where we got telegraphs from. So like when you used to send somebody a telegraph, it was sent over a wire system from one teleprinter to the other. It printed out your message, and then they delivered the message by hand. Then over time, they figured out that they could actually use a teleprinter to communicate with an electronic computer. And this is kind of a major step that we took past using punch cards on a computer, and especially after using vacuum tubes on a computer. And it was still really big and bulky compared to what we know today, but basically imagine this guy right here connected to a giant processor. You type in your command, like what's 2 plus 2, and it prints it, and then it almost instantly spits out 4. And that's how it worked. That was the very first interface. And then when we were able to get video displays, which is basically what we consider a monitor today, it was able to do the exact same job as a teleprinter, so it made teleprinters obsolete. And those got started in the 70s, they really became a thing in the 80s, they really became a thing in the 90s, and they're pretty much exclusively what we use today. Teleprinters are still used, kind of, just not with us, like, at all. Like, they're used in air travel. If you send a telegraph, it oftentimes is still over a teleprinter. Not always, but oftentimes. Alright, so, in learning about command lines, here's some important terminology. What is a shell? The shell is the program that the computer runs that prompts your command line interface into action. And then a terminal is the visual representation of that program. It's what I'm actually seeing on a screen. So technically speaking, right here, the teleprinter, the physical thing, that's the terminal, because that's what I'm seeing, that's what I'm interacting with. And then when the teleprinter would send the message, that's the shell. Now, in today's world, with my nifty command prompt right here, this right here is my terminal, because this is what I'm actually seeing. This is what I'm interacting with. And then the shell is what the terminal is using to prompt the CLI. Like when I start CMD, it starts the shell, and the shell tells basically the interpreter, the command line interface, like, oh, you need to start doing your job now. Okay? And then there are different types of command line interfaces out there. Like I showed you before, mine's called CMD. It's useful in any Windows systems. If you are at all familiar with Linux or Unix systems, they actually really have a million. They have a million different types out there. Because Linux is open source. There's a lot of different types of Linux OSs, and a lot of them have different command lines. That being said, the most popular today is called Bash, and Bash is really useful, really flexible, and a lot of people really like it. If you're using a Mac, yours is called Terminal. I'm just going to warn you right now, don't try to use Terminal. I have heard nothing but horrible things about people who try to use it. Just trying to operate a Mac, like to actually operate a Mac, beyond all the pretty things, is really rough. So anyway, and then there's actually a relatively new one, it only came out a few years ago, called PowerShell, and it's used with Windows, and it actually got a lot of really good reviews because it is basically like CMD but better in every way. It took a lot of elements from a Unix system to improve its command line system, and that basically makes it able to do a lot more things, make it a lot more flexible, a lot more specific control, and that's all good things. And I have PowerShell as well, which I will show you now. So here's PowerShell, and you can tell that PowerShell looks a lot like CMD. Like, there's my CMD, there's my PowerShell. And as far as iAware, just as the average user, they're kind of doing the same thing, but PowerShell can just do more, and it can do more on an easier level. And those are kind of like the big differences between the different shells out there. Bash just has more capability and more power than CMD, but PowerShell arguably has more power and capability than Bash. And then there's also a thing called virtual terminals. Now, virtual terminals are very special and very specific. They allow users in multi-user systems, so say you have one computer and you have 6 users on that computer, which is actually pretty common now with home computers, but imagine this in a business situation. What a virtual terminal does is it allows users to work on different programs at the same time on the same computer. Okay, so with Linux, there are literally specific 6 different types of virtual terminals on a Linux system. It's like you just hit Control Alt F1 and you've hit virtual terminal number 1. Control Alt F2, that's virtual terminal number 2. And so on and so forth, 1 through 6. If you hit Control Alt F7, that is the terminal, that is not the virtual terminal. Now, so one person can be using virtual terminal 1 while another person uses virtual terminal 6, and all of these things can be done on the same computer at the same time. So it's really useful for people. And there is one that's offered for Windows, and that's called PuTTY. And here's that TTY thing coming out again. TTY is just a shorthand term for terminal. And it's kept over from the teleprinters, and I just think that that's really cool. There's also a system called Cygwin, which is on my computer, but it is a means of accessing a Linux command line on a Windows machine. That's all it is. It's a program that allows you to run Bash on Windows. Okay, so right here I have Bash. I'm actually running Bash on my Windows computer. And if you're someone who's really comfortable with running a Linux terminal, then boom, you can use it to work on your Windows computer. And I can actually do it from both of these at the same time, which is a really, really nice. There we go. Okay, so what's so useful about the command line interface is that it can do everything that your GUI can. Everything. It can oftentimes do more than your GUI can. Like, it can really manipulate registries in a fast and efficient way that your GUI can't even handle. And just all sorts of good stuff. So, really useful stuff. Try to look into some of the commands. Try to look into how to operate them. You can do all sorts of cool stuff. And I'm going to show you more what you can do about it later. Have a good day.